What you're about to watch is a very special and really a very personal episode of Unlocking Moves. It's personal because in January of 2025, I got the unique opportunity to interview my 94-year-old aunt from North Carolina when my sister was visiting her. We decided to do a video recording because we just thought it would be fun to have her on a podcast. It was for family, but we decided to go ahead and put it out there as a Mother's Day tribute. It's even more special because she passed away 2 weeks later. And so you're going to get some very raw emotion and some raw stories in this episode. And I hope that it inspires you to do something similar with your relatives, no matter the age. Gather some videos, some audio, so whatever it is, capture their stories so you've got it for much longer than they're here on earth. So I hope you enjoy this very special, personal, unique episode of Unlocking Moves. So I can't wait to dive in. Aunt B, welcome to Unlocking Moves.
Unlucky what? Unlucky?
Unlocking.
Unlucky. Oh, okay, let's do it. When we went to bed on Christmas Eve, we hung a cotton stocking, a long cotton stocking that you wore with
Oh, let's ignore that.
Okay,
First rule in podcasts is to turn your cell phone off, Aunt Barbara.
it's over.
I'm gonna just go see if it's
Oh, this is hot.
Why don't I take a pause while Kari goes to get the phone, and now I'm going to tell the audience the reason she's saying nice things about her brother and sister are because they're older than her, and A, they might beat her up, and B, they're already in heaven, and she wants to make sure she is taken care of when she gets there.
Yeah, I want a nice greeting when I get there.
Did everybody have one, or it sounds like you shared, like maybe a neighbor had one and you would share, or maybe 2 or 3 people would use the same one?
I don't know. I just know that we didn't have one, and our neighbor did, and she was very, very generous with it.
You probably didn't have one because your mother lost all of her money playing bridge. It sounds like she was playing bridge a lot.
Oh, Kurt.
And I didn't know my grandmother. So I appreciate hearing stories.
I do too.
That's nice. This is fun.
Even though she was a gambler and she made you do things like wear pants. She sounds like a horrible person. Welcome to Unlocking Moves, where we want to uncover those key pivotal moments and decision points that really change the lives of successful people. And I want to hear their stories because I think we learn the best from stories. But I don't want to hear just your glory stories. I want to hear their gory stories because, as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. So my guest today is Barbara Modisett, who happens to be my aunt, my mother's sister. And Aunt Barbara, before we get going, I got to tell you, I like to hit my guests up with an off-the-wall question or comment to really keep them on their toes, keep my audience on their toes. You ready?
Sure.
Actually, I've got a softball teed up for you, okay? And it's really just a yes or no question. I'm just confirming that I, Kurt Wilkin, am your favorite nephew. Is that correct?
She's hesitating.
I don't know if I want to commit to that.
I first of all, I thought this was a softball, the easiest question I was going to ask. And second of all, you tell me I'm your favorite nephew all the time. So I figured we're good for that.
Well, I didn't know I was going to have to sign in blood over that.
But we
So
do
you're
know
telling me you've been lying all these years. Is that right?
No, but as Kari just reminded me that I know who my favorite niece is.
Yes.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Am I your favorite niece or nephew? But I'm not gonna go there because my sisters are with you filming in your apartment.
That's right.
As you can tell, my guest today is my Aunt Barbara Modisett. She's my mom's sister, as I mentioned. She was born, I'm going to say this just for posterity. I know you're not supposed to ask a lady her age, but I'm going to say this, you were born in 1930. Is that okay? We can scratch it if you don't want to.
I'm on the ice of March.
On the Ides of March. There you go. March 15th, 1930. So she's 94 years old. She grew up in the Depression, as you could tell, and she's born in North Dakota, so very cold Depression. And she spent a lot of time outside of Chicago in Winnetka, Illinois. And now for the last, I'm going to say 20 plus years, she's lived in Chapel Hill. And her husband was John Modisett. We'll go into his witness protection program, whether it's John or Jack. We'll go into that a little bit later. And I'll tell you, we're filming this from her apartment somewhere in North Carolina. We can't tell you where because we don't want the immigration authorities or whoever collects old people. We don't want them to find her.
I like that. Collect old people.
So I can't wait to dive in. Aunt B, welcome to Unlocking Moves.
Unlucky what?
That's the name of its podcast.
It's called Unlocking Moves.
Yeah.
Unlucky.
Unlocking.
Unlucky. Oh, okay. Let's do it.
Yeah. So you thought you were unlucky to be on this podcast, but it's Unlocking Moves.
Well, I have trouble hearing once in a while. Hey, buddy.
All right, there you go. Well, Aunt Barbara, I want to start with your story. And just to get a little bit of background, as I mentioned, you were born in North Dakota, Grand Forks, North Dakota in the 1930s. That had to be cold as the dickens. But tell me a little bit about your childhood. What can you share with us about your childhood?
Well, I had a wonderful sister and I had a wonderful brother. And he used to tease us. He'd chase us around. He would spring out behind doors and he would scare us. That was fun. And I shared a bedroom with my sister, who was your mother. And well, I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but when we went to bed on Christmas Eve, we hung a cotton stocking, a long cotton stocking that you wore with garland.
Oh, let's ignore that.
Okay.
First rule in podcasts is to turn your cell phone off, Aunt Barbara.
It's over unless it's Mirabelle that we want to talk to. That's all right.
Hold that just like that. I'm going to just go see if it's
Oh, this is hot. This is hot. So anyway, I liked my sister growing up.
Well, why don't I take a pause while Cardi goes to get the phone, and now I'm going to tell the audience the reason she's saying nice things about her brother and sister are because they're older than her, and A, they might beat her up, and B, they're already in heaven, and she wants to make sure she has is taken care of when she gets there.
Yeah, I want a nice greeting when I get there, so that don't worry about the telephone they hung up.
Yeah. And we're going to ignore it if it rings again. So
there
All
you
right.
go.
So you hung a cotton stocking somewhere for someone to put something in, presumably.
That's right. We had, and they were long stockings that went from toe to hip. And there was the first thing that went in was an orange, not an apple. It was an orange. And from there on, the goodies were endless. They were tiny little things like stuff for the dollhouse. And they go really well in a stocking. So that was fun. Now, next question.
Well, I want to show the viewers, whoever views this, we're going to pop in a picture of that dollhouse because it was an amazing dollhouse that we have pictures of you and my mom, whose name was Elsie Ann, and you guys would play dolls in it all the time. And if I recall, the house was the size of a wall, like it was maybe 6 feet long at least, and 2 or 3 feet tall, maybe.
The whole wall up, and it was that was our playroom. That was it.
Hey, let me ask this because this is a nice segue. We're going to come back to your childhood in a second, but as I recall, so my Uncle John, Uncle Jack, and Barbara's husband died about a year ago, and since then she's in her apartment still, and in her facility there are places where they'll move you as you age and so forth. And Aunt Barbara is very adamant she does not want to move out of her apartment. And so she taught me a trick that she used whenever the people would come and check on her to do a health checkup. And what is that trick, Aunt Barbara? What kind of words are you supposed to use with that person?
I've forgotten. Tell me.
Well, this is a podcast where we have potty mouth, so we can say whatever bad word comes to mind, including the F word, as I recall.
Okay. Then
So tell me, what were the magic words you're supposed to tell the healthcare worker?
I don't remember. Are you
Oh,
trying to get her to say fuck you?
Exactly. She was playing angel. Yeah, so if you use the F word several times, get the F out of here, or how the F are you doing, or whatever.
Well,
The
I've changed my mind.
Really?
Right. As long as they can put me into hospice at the same time I go to the health center, I'd go this afternoon.
Because it's free.
Then everything is free. And that's important. You know? Why
I
should I
like it.
give it? Yeah. Anyway, that's my wish.
I
All
just
right.
can't believe I've heard Aunt Barbara say the F word. My mom's going to poke you for that when you get there.
Well,
My mother never said the F word.
I'm so sorry that I have disillusioned you.
I'm pretty sure she did, just maybe not in your presence, Corey.
I'm pretty sure it's
All right, so let's go back to I was asking about the winters in North Dakota, and the way you had to heat the house was how? Through coal?
Yes. There were registers and the dad had to go down to the basement every day and fill the stoker that was a big old piece of machinery, and he would take the coal from the coal room, the coal chute, and fill the stoker with coal, and then it went burning through the furnace, and there were registers throughout the house where the heat came out. And that was a terrible job to have to do, and I'm not surprised that he died young from a heart attack, because that was tough. That was tough.
I can't
And
imagine having I guess people still today have coal furnaces, I'm sure, but not
yeah,
where anybody I
probably.
know.
Yeah, they probably do. So we had storm windows, and that helped the heating situation a lot. And so the house was warm, and the outside was cold, and it was to walk to school. And my stories are to I had when I by the time I went to junior high, I had about a mile to walk. Poor me. And mother made me wear snow pants. And I stopped to pick up a friend, and it was out of sight of my house. So reluctantly, my friend's mother allowed me to take off my snow pants and leave them at my friend's house. And then on the way home, I would put them back on again and go home. I was duplicitous girl.
and you made your friend's mother a co-conspirator.
Yes, my friend's mother was a co-conspirator, and she became a very nice friend. She gave us a shower when Jack and I were getting married, and so she was there all the time. In fact, in the shower, she and two other of my friends presented me with a negligee, and one of them modeled it in the store. They giggled and had a good time doing that.
Nice. Now, let me ask you, first of all, you used the word duplicious, and I asked you not to use big words on this podcast. My listeners can't understand those big words.
Well, let's help them out.
We'll everybody please use Google or Chat GPT to find out what duplicious means. I will, let me ask you this though. So obviously snow pants were not in fashion. How old were you at the time? I assume you had a dress or skirt you changed into. Tell me about that.
No, I could stuff my skirt into the snow pants.
Okay.
And then you had to wear boots on top of that. And
How old were
uh,
you? Were you a teenager where you really wanted to look really cute, or were you a younger girl?
I was probably 13, 14. And so that was at the very, very sensitive age.
Did the other girls not wear snow pants?
No,
Oh.
I had the farthest distance to go.
Oh, okay.
The rest of them all, I really should have gone to a different school.
Okay.
But my brother and sister had both gone to the farthest distant school. And it's the one it was the one, it was the desirable school.
Okay.
The rest the rest was close to the downtown, and that was the big high school. You had to go there eventually, but I didn't want to go there in junior high because there weren't the swell kids didn't go there.
Okay.
The cool kids weren't there. Okay, so this is the equivalent of today's social media. You wanted to look good at school, so you changed out of your snow pants and you went to the cool kids' school. Okay, so
Yeah.
those types of things went on even in that almost 100 years ago. So that's amazing.
That's right. It is. Absolutely right. You got it.
That's awesome. So, hey, on the topic of mothers, Mother's Day is around the corner, and I'd love to learn a little bit about your mother and maybe just get some other. Let's stay on the subject of mothers here for a bit. What can you tell me about your mother, my grandmother? And her
Your
name
mother was
was
Mabel.
okay, Mabel, and well,
Mabel Caroline Brendan Brown.
okay.
Love to hear her talk about when she first saw my dad. He was working at the Herald, at the newspaper, in the advertising department, and mother went in to apply for a job. And she says he met her eyes across the room, and she knew. I love that. And so they started dating, and they married, and he became my dad, and here we are.
Wow, love at first sight, really. So, did she came
It was.
into the store? What was the situation again?
It was the advertising room, and it probably had maybe 10 desks in it where people took ads, and she was one of the ad takers.
So she was one
So
of the
she
employees. Did she work for him or just with him?
I think just with him,
Okay.
because he became advertising manager after I was born, and she was a mother then. She was at home.
Okay.
She never really worked under him. Mr. Pearson was the man who was her boss and dad's boss. And I remember somewhere finding an invitation where he invited them, having realized that they were a couple, to come over for dinner a particular night.
Nice. Now, if I recall, I've heard stories. Now, just for the listeners' edification, I never met my grandmother or grandfather on that side. They both passed before I was born, but I've heard stories about my grandfather since he worked in advertising at the local newspaper that he would, when he went out for dinner or went out to, go buy something at a store, he'd like to frequent the people that advertise with him, which is business 101 in any day and age. Do business with the people who do business with you or who write your paychecks. That's for sure. Tell me a little bit about that. What was that like? And am I
Well,
right with that story?
yes, and how he gathered ads daily by walking a beat and going into the store. And I love the story of going into it was on Valentine's Day, and he had gone into the hardware store, and he said something about, had the woman gotten the Valentine's? She said, "I've never gotten one." So Dad bought her a box of candy.
Oh,
I thought that was sweet.
that is.
So let me make sure I got that straight. Every day he would walk a beat to try to collect advertisers for the next day's
Yes,
paper or something.
yes,
Wow.
he did. Until, well, it's a small town, until he became advertising manager, and then he didn't do that anymore. He had minions to do that.
So let me just make this in a tip for today's salespeople who they don't like to pick up the phone and make cold calls. Imagine 100 years or 70 years ago, whatever time that period that was, maybe it was 100 years, and you didn't pick up the phone to make cold calls. You had to get out in -10-degree weather in the winter and knock
Yes,
on doors every day. Holy
yeah,
smokes!
that's right. That's exactly right.
Wow.
And then when I was a teenager, I had a summer job being a proofreader at the paper, and it was hard type. It was interesting what you had to proofread from. And sometimes this society editor, because she knew I knew everybody on the society page, she would have me call and ask them if they had any visitors or if they were taking any trips. And I felt very important calling my friends' parents, as it were, and asking if they had any house guests or if they were going on any little trips that I could put in the paper. Then I would pass that information to Edith Thompson, the society editor. And she had full trust in me because I knew these people. So there I was, a big shot.
Wow, it's such a cool job. I'm sure this still happens in small towns even today, but just for my listeners to hear this, there's sections in these small town newspapers where it was a human interest story, like what's going on in town, what's going on at the Brown house, what's going on at the Wilkin house. They have a visitor in from Louisiana to see their new baby. I mean, that's got to be just fascinating content for small towns.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure they still do it because I remember when in Brinkley, where our other grandmother lived, they stopped doing it because somebody used the information from one of those stories to break into a house because they knew the family was gone. So that may not be a thing anymore.
So definitely a more innocent age, and I can very much appreciate a more innocent age. That's for sure. Can I get an amen on that one? And the voice that you just heard was my sister, Kari Spencer, and she is visiting my Aunt Barbara. So we gave her some airtime there too. All right, well let's keep on the topic of mom. Any other cool grandma stories, your mom stories that come to mind?
Oh, lots of stories. Because we shared a bedroom. Oh, I know what I like to do. I like to watch her put on makeup. We
This is
each
your
had
mom
a
or
little-
my mom?
Your mom.
Okay, her sister. Okay, tell me more about Elsie Ann, your sister.
Well, we each had a dressing table. They had a rather large bedroom. We had a dressing table, and then your mom had a highboy, and I had a desk that was all bird's eye maple wood, and we thought it was wonderful. So we got what we wanted for furniture, and I remember saving every year. I saved a little box full of Christmas tree needles and watched them turn gray. And I remember watching her put on her makeup, and she wore mascara and all kinds of grown-up cosmetics that I wasn't allowed to. We each had a collection of music boxes in our bedroom on little shelves. And every year I saved a box of Christmas tree needles. I don't know why, but I did. And so then, and if we fought, because we had twin beds, if we fought, and I suppose I was the one that was the stinker most of the time, I would mess up her bed as I was making mine deliberately because it was rather close in between the two beds. I would deliberately mess hers up. And that's how malicious we were. Messing up your sister's bed is about the worst we could do.
Well, you're a lady after my heart because you're also the baby of the family, so you like to stir the pot a bit. I'm the baby I have 3 siblings myself, so I can appreciate that. And you are, is it 3 years younger than your
Yeah,
sister?
3 years younger. And one time we had a very serious fight. We were doing dishes, and I chased her with a knife. And Elsie Ann went down. Mother was out at a bridge game, probably. And so Elsie Ann went running down to the basement to tell Dad, who was putting coal on the fire, that I had chased her with a knife. And Dad came upstairs and said, "Go to bed." That's all he said. So that was shameful enough. And I never tried to hurt her again.
So,
Thank you.
my sweet angelic aunt chased my mother with a knife.
That's right.
I'm not sure that you were asking for a ticket into heaven and a warm welcome. I'm not sure that's gonna get a warm welcome.
Well, hopefully I have made amends over time.
I think, as I understand it, the Lord is very into forgiveness, and so is my mom. So I'm sure you're forgiven.
I like to think so.
And I know so. I know so. Okay, so we talked about that. What about your mom? Tell me a couple of stories about your mom, Mabel.
She was a real lady. She never said an unkind word. She was a friend to everybody. She was a friend to the next door neighbor who allowed her, or invited her, I should say, to mangle the sheets. Do you know what mangling is?
Don't.
It it is it is a machine that you feed. There's 2 rollers and sheets and whatever goes through it, and it presses. It's like ironing them. And so mother and Margaret Rutherford was her name, and the 2 of them would chat in Margaret's basement while mother mangled the sheets. She was a nice neighbor. It was she that got me a job at the hospital. The summer I was married, and she had gone overseas, and I was sitting there waiting for my orders, hoping it would come tomorrow. And it was probably hard to get a job when you were getting orders any day to leave the country. But because she was in charge of nursing at the hospital, she was able to get me a job under those temporary circumstances. And it was very nice because I don't know what else I would have done if I hadn't gotten a job and made a few dimes to spend while I was living at home.
Well, I appreciate that story. I'm going to come back on 2 or 3 different things that you said. First of all, the power of your friends and of your network. You needed a job and you weren't sure how, you need to be very flexible, and your friend helped you out. That's just how the world works. And I would encourage everybody looking for a job to leverage their network and their friends. The other thing is a question, and that is, these manglers, did everybody have one? Or it sounds like you shared, like maybe a neighbor had one and you would share, or maybe 2 or 3 people would use the same one.
I don't know. I just know that we didn't have one, and our neighbor did, and she was very, very generous with it.
You probably didn't have one because your mother lost all of her money playing bridge. It sounds like she played bridge a lot.
Oh, Kurt.
And I didn't know my grandmother. So I appreciate hearing stories.
I do too.
That's nice. This is fun.
Even though she was a gambler and she made you do things like wear pants. She sounds like a horrible person.
Oh,
Tell me more. You got some more? I know there's some good holiday traditions from your mom, but tell me any other stories?
well, I remember that she had a good friend who had a daughter that turned out to be a lesbian. And so she wasn't interested in parties, but she had a lot of formals that she didn't wear very much. And I got them because I was interested in boys and she wasn't. So that was fun to get these dresses. And her name was Ella Hawkins. And she lived across the street from the Episcopal Church. And she entered our lives when Jack and I were dating, and he was coming over for church to the Episcopal Church, which was another story. And then he would have Sunday dinner with us. And then sometimes we would take mother to the movies. How about that for dating? Anyway, when we went to church, on the way home from church, one day, Mr. Hawkins called to us and asked us if we had a minute to come in. And Ella had some awful disease. And she had been moved to the dining room, which became her bedroom. And he asked if I could comb Ella's hair that day. And so I did. And then we had a glass of sherry, and that became a tradition that every Sunday we'd stop after church and go in and have a glass of sherry with Ella and Walt and spend half an hour or so with her. I felt important. It was nice.
Well,
That's all.
tell me how old you were when you were just shooting shots of sherry as a young girl.
Oh, well, I was in college. I was a senior in
Okay,
college.
okay. Darn it, I wanted you to be 14 or 15 so I could make a comment about my drunk aunt. Okay, so you mentioned something about movies, and as I recall, growing up in the 30s and early 40s, movies were not, there's not movie theaters with 8 screens, and they're not out all over the place. You can't get it
Oh,
on
no,
Netflix.
no.
So
No.
tell me about that. And I think there was also something special because your father was the advertising manager at the
That's
newspaper.
right. Absolutely right. He had a family pass for
Emily
Sunday movie.
Pass.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was really nice because nobody had a lot of money. So we would all, even my brother, 9 years older, we'd all walk down because we didn't use the car in winter. We walked down to the best theater that had the first showing of movies. And in those days, there was never a time when the best theater didn't have family movies. So it was always Mickey Rooney and not very nice one, not very fun ones. I mean, they were tiresome movies, but we went happily. That's all.
And so was there another movie theater in town that showed all the smut?
There were three. There were three theaters. One had the first showing, the other one had reruns, and then the third one had not so good ones.
So is that where you hung out most of the time? The not so good one?
No, they're very, very rarely.
Where were the cute boys that you were chasing? Which movies were they going to?
I don't know, because at that time we were just going to family movies, and I don't think I was even noticing boys at that time.
Okay. So you mentioned your brother. So you have an older brother who's, you said, 9 years older than you. This is my uncle Frank, your brother Frank. Tell me a little bit about him.
Well, he was just wonderful. He was fun in that my place at the dining room table every night, I sat with my back to the living room. And the living room, we always turned the lights on. This was Depression. You didn't leave a light on in a room if you weren't in there. So we turned the lights off in the living room. Frank was sitting across the table from me, and he loved to look over my head and say, "Oh, Barbara, don't turn around." I can still hear him. He scared the liver out of me. And so he was fun.
So he had a lot of his enjoyment out of picking on his younger sister.
That's right. By the same token, he was very kind to me. And it was my brother, Frank, that I asked the meaning of words. I asked him what rape was. Now, how about that? Asking your older brother what rape was. And he told me. Very straightforward. Yep.
So he was 9 years older, so he must have been almost a hero to you growing up. You idolized him?
Yep. He was a hero. Yeah.
Wow. All right. So in the spirit of Mother's Day, as I started, tell me a little bit about, well, actually, before I go there, I want to ask you, holidays I know were a big thing in the Brown house, and I know it was in my house growing up, specifically Christmas. Tell me about some of your favorite Christmas traditions that your mom had.
Yes. We opened presents Christmas morning, but Christmas Eve was very special in that we put candles in every window, which is interesting because that's a fire trap. With clothespins, we tie the curtains back and even upstairs. We would all be downstairs, and Mother would allow us to light a candle in windows upstairs. And there were curtains in every window, so we pinned them back. It's astonishing. I remember a nice thing that we did in the dining room one Christmas dinner. We were on a bus route, and the bus went by, and we thought, "Aw, that's awful that they have to work on Christmas Eve." So we thought, what can we do? And we rustled up a little bag we had a package of cigarettes and cookies and candy. And then we took turns, the three of us, standing up when we could see the bus coming from a block away, coming around the corner. So we'd take turns running out and standing on the corner. The bus would stop, and we would get on the bus and hand them this bag and said, "Merry Christmas," and then get off the bus and do the same thing 20 minutes later when another bus came by. And we thought that was magic.
Tell them where the cigarettes came from that you put in the bag.
Where did they come?
You told me the other night who donated the cigarettes to the bag.
Yes. Well, we did.
They were. You told me you sacrificed your
Yes,
cigarettes.
that's right. That's right, I did. Well, I think we all smoked, so I can't say that I'm the generous one.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, that's regardless of what was in the bag, it sounds like a very sweet tradition, and I'm sure the bus drivers
Yes, it was.
appreciated it, and something
Yes,
that many of us in today's day and age could take as a nice lesson to do at any holidays or any time, really. Do nice things.
yes, that's right.
Okay, now let me ask. I know we're in the spirit of time. We've got all the time in the world, but let me ask you the next question. I want to make sure we cover my grandfather, your father. So we talked about his job. Tell me a little bit about his. What was he like? Any special interests? Any habits? Any hobbies? Any fun
Well,
stories?
he liked to hunt and fish, and he had a pal from the Herald, and they would go hunting together, pheasant hunting in western North Dakota, and that was always exciting. The four of them, the wives and the husbands, played bridge together, so they were tight friends. And then Dad liked to, fish. And for a long time, you couldn't fish at Maple Lake because it was mucky. So we would go out there, and it seemed that the only activity my dad had was repairing stuff because they didn't want to buy new. They wanted to make use with, for instance, there is a system I can't believe works, but if you have a pail for water and it has a hole in the bottom, you can put a plug in it, a metal plug. And that's the sort of thing he did during when the lake was down and you couldn't fish or swim. He would be repairing pails and things. We saved old nails and rubber bands, all that kind of stuff.
Well, those are some great Depression era type of habits. I know my parents and I know my dad's parents had some of the same
You-
habits. So you mentioned, well, first of all, just for everyone's knowledge, you mentioned the Herald. The Herald is the Grand Forks Herald. It's the name of the newspaper that my grandfather worked at. And then you mentioned Maple Lake. So I know that's a special childhood place for you and for me. We visit there periodically. It's a little lake about, if I recall, I'm gonna say 45 minutes. It might have been 7 hours back when you had a horse-drawn carriage taking you out there. But at least one or two summers, the dam broke or something, so it was just a pile of mud. And my mom used to have some of the best stories about when the lake wasn't there, when it was just a pile of mud. Tell us a little bit about Maple Lake and maybe those summers.
Yes, the lake went dry for, and I guess during the Depression, and you couldn't swim in it. It was low and it had a smell to it that was awful, but we kept going. We could sunbathe and we could row across this mucky lake and go blueberry picking. And the things that we did were not what you'd expect to do at a lake, but you had to find something to do because we kept going. It was a very modest cottage with 3 bedrooms and a pot-bellied stove. It had a wood-burning cook stove, and I don't know, Mother was able to make pancakes. That's what Dad liked. So she made pancakes with this wood-burning stove.
And as I recall, you mentioned going there a lot. So you would go there basically on the first day of summer and leave on the last day of summer, and your dad would commute in Fridays and Sunday, Friday there and Sunday back to go to work. Is that right?
That's right, and one thing he did, which I remember very warmly, is that your mother and I shared a bedroom. And it was very rustic. We each had a little wooden shelf by our side of the bed. And Dad would come in and count out the change that he had. It might have been 11 cents or 8 cents or whatever, pennies. And we always knew that we should pretend we were asleep, but we could hardly wait to find out how much our what would amount to our weekly allowance would be. And the minute we heard him in the car going back up the hill to go back to Grand Forks, we would get up and count our pennies. And then when it was what we did with the pennies was walk down, usually barefoot, to the equivalent of a short block to a little store that sold candy. It had a piano player, and sometimes older kids would put a nickel in the piano player, and that was very exciting entertainment.
So those pennies would buy you candy for the week, presumably. And just, to put us in perspective, around the 1940, when you had 5 pennies, that's worth about $5,000 in today's money.
I got that right.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to cover, you said you had a potbelly stove for heat. So this was in the summer, this is in Minnesota, right across the border, but it was still very cold. So you did have some heat. You didn't have any kind of cool, but you didn't need it. It was, I guess it might have gotten hot at times, but not too many times. But you didn't have plumbing, or you didn't have toilet plumbing. Tell me about your outhouse. I want to hear some outhouse stories.
That was the Biffy. We call the outhouse the Biffy. And it was a 2-seater. I don't know
2-seater?
why- Yeah. I don't know why anybody would want to. Your mother and I did. We went up the hill together, and there was a 2-seater, so we were good. And
Oh,
we
boy.
had rakes and the lawnmower up there. And then we emptied the ashes from that pot-bellied stove up there, and that was the sanitizer.
All right. So first of all, I've always wondered, why would it be up the hill? Doesn't poop roll downhill? I don't understand that part.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. You got it. And not only is that the very unsanitary place to put a Biffy, but my grandmother, who was the first generation there, had a garden right downhill from the Biffy.
Tasty
So-
vegetables.
Yeah, really. And for years after she didn't have a garden anymore, asparagus grew. Asparagus, once it's taken root, it will come back year after year, and it did. And my mother cooked it. Nobody seemed to care that it was stupid and unsanitary.
Okay, as I recall, you didn't always know if someone was in the Biffy, and if it's cold, you don't want to hike up there. Was there a call or some sort of mechanism to?
Yes, there was a movie, The Riff Song, that Arabs, and that was the riff song. It was from a movie. And so that was one thing we chose to call up to see if you were up there, you were supposed to answer that same call.
And what was the call again?
And there's a song about
Okay.
the riffs are coming. It's a
Roofs
movie.
are coming. Very nice. All right. So, Corey, any other questions about childhood? We could ask some questions about your mom's sister, Aunt Elsie, if you'd like. But, Corey, any questions you have before we move on?
Aunt Elsie was your dad's sister.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So, yeah. Any stories about your Aunt Elsie you'd like to share? Oh, there's a call.
Is that the call?
That's
So it
the
wasn't a
call.
verbal call; it was a whistle, basically, that you had.
And if you were up there, you just have to muster your energy and respond.
What if your hands are doing something else with toilet paper or such? How do you call back?
That's not an issue. You have to stop what you're doing and answer the call.
Is that why they call it the call of duty?
Maybe.
The duty.
Oh boy. All right. Okay. Anything about Aunt Elsie that's important that you want to talk about?
And Elsie kept our dollhouse going because she most of the time was working in Chicago. And so she would shop at Marshall Fields and get these wonderful, hard to find nuggets for the dollhouse. And what was fun about that is that Mother made us have breakfast before we could open presents. And the littlest presents usually were hung on the tree, and we knew that they were dollhouse stuff. And we just itched to have that, but we couldn't until we were through with breakfast. But she found us some really wonderful, tiny little gifts for the dollhouse.
Nice.
And the
Well,
dollhouse was all we had for a playroom.
well, as girls always know that the best presents come in tiny packages, and that was true even when you were a young girl in the
Absolutely.
1930s. Okay, so I do want to ask you this. So your father, my grandfather, you said died at a relatively early age, and I don't remember you saying anything about your mother working. I guess maybe at the Herald there for a little bit, but as I recall, you had to rent out rooms in your house to strangers, which seems incredibly dangerous in today's day and age. But obviously, you guys made it work. How did that work? And
Well, we had, before Dad even died, the half of the upstairs was made into an apartment. Actually, it had been an apartment because that's where Grandma Brown lived. And when she died, it was a ready-made apartment. And so Dagny Hassel and her mother, you may have heard them, basically family friends, church friends, Lutherans, they moved in. Dagny Hassel was a teacher at the junior high school, and she was a good old girl. We found her wonderful. And so she was upstairs, and her mother lived with her. And you imagine having to live with your mother when you're 50 years old or whatever. But the grandmother was a friend of, not so much, was an acquaintance of Grandma who would come down and bore Grandma. My grandma didn't like her, but she lived upstairs, so she came down. And then who was next? Oh, when Dad died, Mother was able to turn the other, I can't imagine. She turned the other half of the upstairs into an apartment. And that meant that Grandma Brendan had to come down and sleep in Mother's room. After her husband had just died, she had her mother living in her bedroom. It must have just been awful. But that's what she had to do to keep the wolf from. And then she went back to work on top of that. So that had been very, very hard. Anyway, that's what she did.
thank you. Thanks for sharing. Okay, I would love to hear some tips. So you're, as I mentioned before, 94 years old, and you were married to your husband for, I believe, 70 years. Is that right?
That's right.
So I'd love to
That was
hear some tips about longevity, maybe tips about being married for so long. Any good tips for the audience and for us?
Well, it was really, and I don't think I'm sugarcoating it, it was really good. Just about most of it. Except when our kids died. Okay.
Take your time.
Some wonderful trips. And we started traveling a lot because Jack knew that I was very fond of Chopin. And we were members of the National Trust. And one day we got an invitation of a combined trip for the National Trust and Harvard. And it was a trip to go to Chopin's birthplace and having from various places across Europe where there were notable pianists playing Chopin. And bless my husband said, we gotta go. So what the good news was that we got on from then on in, we were invited to all the Harvard trips because we had gone to this Chopin one. And that we've met some wonderful people and neighbors in Chapel Hill that were bona fide
Harvard.
Yeah. All right. So that was good. We were having some wonderful trips because of the National Trust association with her.
So let me just set the stage here. So you're a Chopin fan. So I'm not sure how many of my listeners are Chopin fans, but now we've planted the seed. You also got invited to this Harvard trip, which neither one of you, as I recall, went to Harvard. So now you're in this society of very presumably smart, but probably a little highbrow, maybe, so to speak, folks. But now you're in the
Probably both.
club. Now you're in the
Probably.
club.
Yeah. We were embraced by them, and that was nice. They didn't seem to know that we hadn't gone to Harvard.
They would
So
have
we
pushed you off the boat if they'd known that you didn't go to Harvard.
probably. Anyway, we've always made an album of our trips, and so I think there are 3 or 4 that are Harvard that we enjoyed because we had come from the National Trust. That's good.
Hey, let's touch on that for a second. You mentioned the albums for these trips. I know that you've done many, I'll say, albums for your family about growing up or about memories or about Maple Lake or various members of your family, and you've compiled them. Basically, you're the family historian, and you put together these amazing montages and booklets outlining some of your childhood and your sister and brother's childhood, which I can't thank you enough for. They're a treasure. My question is why and how did you get started on that mix? Because it's amazing. And thank you.
Well, I had a wonderful job in Winnetka, the North Shore Country Day School, and with very few credentials, they hired me to do their publications. And I learned how to do it by the seat of my pants. I liked it and I wanted to do it. So I learned how to do it. And one of the jobs was a weekly newsletter to parents. And that was fun. That was absorbing. And then I did a monthly newsletter to alums. And my only credentials were I was editor of our high school yearbook, and I was editor of the Centralian, the newspaper. And so that's my only experience. And they didn't seem to care at North Shore Country Day School that I wasn't a master of education or whatever. They liked what I did. And so, for instance, there was a trip that some of the students were able to take to Moscow. This was right after that Moscow had been opened up. And so I talked to the group that was going, and I said, be sure you get me a nice picture in the square. I've forgotten what it's called. And so I was able to fashion a newsletter about that. And that was hot stuff because people were going to Europe. They weren't going to Moscow. Anyway, so that was a career I just loved. And what was your question?
About the family historian and doing some amazing booklets and pamphlets for the family.
Okay. So I knew how to do that a little bit. And I thought it was fun to do one at Christmas time on family stuff. So I did it. It was all done at the local printer here in Chapel Hill when I was doing those things.
Well, they're a treasure.
Yeah, I just did it. That's all I can say is I just did it. I like to, and so when it's something you like to do, you do it. And then what was rewarding to me was after I retired from North Shore Country Day School, one of the parents there came to me and said, would I be interested in working at the Newberry Library? And I said, yes, I would like to. And she said, well, here's the guy you go to interview with. And I did, and he liked me and I liked him. So I was cataloging the papers of a printer, and it was all air conditioned, climate controlled, cold room to work in. And then one summer, after I had been doing this for quite some time, he called me in, the head of the department, and said that he was going to take a 7-week sabbatical in Italy. And he said, you're a lot better than my secretary. Would I come in? While he was gone, sort his mail and send him what I thought was important. And then I thought that's pretty hot stuff. So I did. That was the
Neat.
best volunteer job.
I want to come back to one thing that talking about my mother, your sister, she would have been born in 1927, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And so she passed in 2007, so she was 80 years old, and
2008.
2008, so just over 80 years old. And if I recall, she was born and raised in small town Grand Forks, North Dakota, and she ended up going to school at the University of North Dakota, and then she ended up working with Time Magazine in New York City. That's where she met my father. But I know that she was always adventurous in spirit, especially when it comes to travel. And I know I've heard stories about her getting on a ocean, voyage with when no one else had ever been to Europe before, and just doing things that no one had done before as a young lady. I'd love to hear some stories about her adventurous spirit and maybe some of those types of travel or whatever comes to mind.
Well, absolutely. She was a wizard. She could maximize anything. And how did that work? When she was, I think, was she in New York at the time? In any case, in a journalism sorority, Sigma Delta Chi, and would be given newsletters. And it was just at the time that Europe was opening up after the war. And she heard about a tour. It was one of these 21 countries in 21 days. And so she took it, and she met, I think that this is the way it went, that when she was on that trip, she was acquainted with people who worked in exciting places. And it may have been, I think it was during that time when she was meeting, because she didn't go with a friend. She just went alone to this European trip. And I'm guessing that that's when she found out about working in Manhattan and at Time Magazine and other wonderful places. So she got the bug to do that. And I don't know if she, at that time on her way home from Europe, decided to apply for the job. I'm not sure the sequence of events, but she jumped right in and got it. And she got an apartment. I remember saying, I stayed with her once. She invited me to New York, and they had an odd shaped apartment. And at one point, when they had room for a new roommate, they advertised for a short girl because it was a small room with a short bed. So they needed a short girl with a steam iron. So you could always share with what was necessary. That was very inventive.
That's funny. So the name of the show is Unlocking Moves, and the idea is that there's some key pivotal moment that really changed the trajectory of your life or career. And I would look at that for my mom as an unlocking move. Who takes a trip by herself in such an adventurous way to go see the world, meets some people. So she's from small town North Dakota. She meets people and ultimately ends up getting an opportunity at Time Magazine. So my mom's name was on the masthead at Time Magazine as an editorial researcher, and she got that break through a trip going on her own to Europe. That's amazing.
That's right. And her job, she used to tell me, was such that she had to fact check everything. If you as a writer were to say the storm happened on April 14th at 26 degrees, she would have to prove that the storm did indeed happen on that day, and that it was on a Thursday, for instance. It was picky stuff, but they trusted her. She had to come across with the real deal.
Well, lucky for us, journalists don't have to have any facts when they report a story in today's day.
I love it when she met your dad, because at that time, people were, I don't know, religious or nice or what have you. The First Presbyterian Church on Fifth Avenue had a couples group that welcomed everybody. I have no idea if there's any such thing there like that now. Probably not. But she went to it, and that's where she met your dad and and somebody else. You remember his name?
They met Ted Pockman
Yeah,
and
Ted.
Mary Pockman, but at first they were on a double date where Mom dated Ted and Mary dated Bob, and then they switched it up. So, and then Ted
Ooh.
and Mary got married.
I love it because it was wholesome. You know, it was just wholesome.
Their first date was a picnic.
Yeah,
Dad made sandwiches.
I just love it. I think that's the very good foundation.
Nice. Okay, so my parents met in New York. My mom's unlocking move. Let's talk about your unlocking move, Aunt Barbara. What would be one key pivotal moment or decision point that changed your life?
Unlucky?
Unlocking.
Oh,
Unlucky move is being on this podcast with me. What is your unlocking?
Oh God.
Something that changed your life.
Well, and it's got to have something to do with Jack. I don't know. I can't think.
Well, let's
How did you
talk
move
about
back?
Jack for a second. We'll come back to this. So Jack has two names, Jack and John. There's a story there, and I'm never really sure what the story is because I feel like I'm being lied to every time I hear the story. So tell me.
The story is that Jack Modisett was adopted into a family whose father's name was John. And so he became Jack. And then when we married and adopted a child, we named him John because we called him John because by then Mr. Modisett was Jack. So it kind of went from one generation to another, from Jack to John. And I think that all there is to it.
Well, then when you moved to Chapel Hill, didn't he revert back to the other?
Oh, no. Yeah. He, after all those years of being Jack, he decided, I really like John and I'm going to go by John in Chapel Hill. And I thought, oh God, I'm going crazy. I can't do this. But I did. And every once in a while, I would call him Jack. And that caused, I had to explain myself for that. That was annoying.
There's too many men in your life, names in your life.
Yeah.
Okay. So unlocking move is perhaps meeting Jack, an unlocking move? Because you ended up, as I recall, falling in love early and moving out of your small town as well.
Oh, yeah. As soon as we married, we got married because he was in the Air Force and was going to go to Germany.
Awesome. All right, Akari, any hard-hitting question? I have a question I call the listener's advocate. If I'm sitting here with Aunt Barbara by yourself, what kind of question would you want to ask? What kind of question would you want Kurt to ask?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
You know all there is to know.
Well, Aunt Barbara, I can't thank you enough for doing this with me and with us. We really appreciate it. I do have one more question. Is there any question that you're never asked and either you wish they would ask you or you're secretly glad that they don't ask?
Oh, that's a very intriguing question. I can't think of any. No, I can't.
I think any question I would have would just have to take too much time to answer because it just boggles my mind the changes in the world from 1930 to now. And I just have too many questions about it.
That's a great question, Kari. Let's ask that in a not quite a yes or no way, but a fairly simple way. Tell us one thing that you think is a change for the better in the 94 years of your life or the 88 years you can remember. And one thing in particular that you recall is just you wish it was better, you liked it better the old way. Back in my day.
Well, that would require a lot of thought. I don't know.
Top stream of consciousness. What is one thing that you think is great and it's a great change, and one thing that you wish it was better or the old way?
Yeah. Gosh, I'm so used to things the way they are now, whether I like them or not.
So you're glad that we no longer have to heat our houses with coal.
Oh, yes.
Or run uphill to the Biffy in the middle of the night.
Yes.
Oh, what we didn't touch on is, as I recall, you had to go, or somebody, you didn't, had to cut ice out of the river in the winter and store it in your house or in a cooler somewhere to keep things cool in the summer. Is that right?
No, that was Bunn, Mr. Bunn, or Ernie Bunn.
Oh, one of the proprietors.
Yeah, it was his job to cut ice in winter and store it in sawdust in his barn. And then he would cut it out of the lake and then store it, and it would stay with a lot of sawdust. It would stay icy, and then he would come to the houses who made a contract with him. This was before anybody had electricity at the lake. And he would come down with a big old chunk of ice on his back, and he smelled. He worked very hard. And then we had an ice box at the lake, and he would rinse it off outside, rinse the ice off so that there wouldn't be any sawdust on it. Then he would schlep it into the ice box, which was right there in the kitchen. And so he would rinse it off. And then there was a hole in the floor of the kitchen where the water dripped down through it. And we had to put a sign up on the side of the refrigerator that said, "Remember the drip," so that we didn't let the drip pan underneath the refrigerator overflow. That would be very bad.
How long did that block of ice last?
I think a week.
Oh,
I think so.
so I want to mention I inherited that dollhouse, and one of my favorite parts of that dollhouse is there is an old-fashioned toy ice box
Yeah.
with a block of ice, which I guess is made of glass. I don't know. And a little set of tongs that you can use to pick up the block of ice and put it in the ice box.
That's right. In fact, I think that might even have a drip in it.
I'll have to check when I get home.
I think it might.
It's either made of glass or it's a very good ice box.
No,
Well, I don't know if they made things of plastic back then is what I was thinking. So it has to be glass.
I think that might well be glass.
Mhm.
Hey,
But
can I ask a question? This could be, I might get Mr. Bunn in trouble, but you said he cut blocks of ice out of the lake. Is there any correlation to him taking blocks of ice out of the lake and the lake drying up and turning into mud?
I don't think so. No.
All right. He's going to go to his grave with that secret, I'm sure. Hey, Aunt Barbara, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Thank you so much for joining me on Unlocking Moves. Thank you, Corey, for being my faithful cameraman there with the phone. And I love you very much.
Well, it was fun.
I love it too.
Thank you for the fun. All right.
Awesome. Well, great,
Thank
guys. I'll upload this to Dropbox here shortly, Corey, and you guys can watch it at your leisure.
That would be fun.
All right. Thanks, Aunt B. By the way, my I love you was for Aunt B, not for you, Corey.
Oh, okay. Well,
They're very bad, Kurt.
whatever.
All right. Thanks.
I'm winning, Willie.
You're still pretty cute.
I love you too. I'm still your favorite nephew. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, we're gonna take a pause while Corey goes to get the phone. It must be those darn old people collectors trying to get you. I want to ask you next. I'm going to ask you about what it was like in the winters in North Dakota with no. I knew you had heat, but it was if I remember correctly, gas heat or something.
It was coal.
Coal heat. Oh.
Yeah. And we had a coal route. The coal was delivered, and it was very exciting because it took a while for it to go down the coal chute into the coal room.
What have you guys been doing for entertainment? You said tonight's TV night. What's the TV show you want to watch?
Oh, tonight I'm going to introduce Kari to an Australian murder mystery. And it's all kind of 1920s.
Ooh.
And I think it's really fashionable. I love it. And she is thick with the detective, and she's smarter than he is, and it's fun. It's just a fun little show.
Nice. What's it called?
Oh, you had to ask.
Oh, I had looked it up. I don't know either. It's on PBS.
Okay. Not Agatha Christie.
No.
So, Corey, I got to ask, did you run the old people collectors off? What did you do there?
I made an appointment. with the old people collector. He'll be here at 2:15.
Uh-oh. No.
Wonderful.
Hey,
No,
while
that was the call she was waiting for. So now we can ignore it for the rest of the time, and it does ring again
That's right.
because our business is complete.
We're you have our full attention.
Yes, sorry about that.